My son stepped backward when he saw me. That's the image I keep coming back to. Not the hug I'd imagined for 6 years, not the running across the yard, not the version I'd rehearsed in my bunk on the ship in the dark. Just a step backward. Small. Automatic. The kind of movement a child makes when they see something they've been told is dangerous. He was 12 years old. The last time I'd held him he was 6, and he'd fallen asleep against my shoulder at the airport. And I'd had to hand him to my mother while he was still sleeping because I couldn't bear to wake him up for a goodbye. I stood in my parents' front yard and I looked at my son and my son looked at me, and neither of us moved. And the whole thing lasted maybe 4 seconds and felt like something much longer. Then Ethan looked at my mother, and my mother looked at the ground, and I understood, in the way you understand things before you can explain them, that something had happened in the 6 years I'd been away that had nothing to do with distance. I just didn't know yet what it was. Let me go back to the beginning. Sarah died on a Tuesday in March. She'd been sick for 14 months, ovarian cancer. Aggressive. The kind that doesn't negotiate. We fought it the way young couples fight things they don't believe can actually win, which is to say we fought it hard and badly, and with a particular desperate optimism that I think is its own kind of grief in retrospect. By the end, she was 34 years old and she weighed 91 pounds, and she died in a hospital room with the afternoon light coming through the blinds in stripes across the bed. And Ethan was in the waiting room with my mother because he was 6, and we hadn't known how to prepare him. He asked me afterward where Mommy went. I told him she went somewhere safe. I know that's not a satisfying answer. I know there are better things to say. But I was 36 years old and I had just watched my wife die and my son was looking at me with Sarah's eyes, and that was the only sentence I could construct. He nodded like it made sense. He was 6. I held it together for about 3 weeks after the funeral. Long enough to handle the paperwork, the condolences, the particular administrative machinery of death that no one tells you about until you're standing in the middle of it. And then one evening Ethan was asleep and I sat at the kitchen table and I looked at the bills and I did the math, and the math didn't work. I had savings, not much. I had a mortgage on a house in a coastal town where the economy ran on fishing and tourism, and neither of them paid particularly well for a man with a certification in marine mechanical systems. I had a 6-year-old who needed stability and consistency, and eventually, college. I had a job offer I'd been turning down for 2 years because Sarah hadn't wanted me to take it. Offshore marine maintenance, 6 months on, 2 months off. Dangerous work, not cinematic dangerous. Just the constant grinding danger of heavy machinery and open water and long hours, and the kind of fatigue that makes people careless. The kind of job that paid 3 times what I made on shore because not enough people were willing to do it. I had turned it down twice because Sarah said she'd worry herself sick. She was gone now, and Ethan needed a future. I called my parents. My father had been a fisherman his entire life. My mother had spent 40 years watching the water from the kitchen window and not saying what she was thinking. They were practical people, my parents, in the way that people become practical when they've lived close enough to the ocean long enough to understand what it takes and what it gives back. They said yes immediately. Of course they'd take Ethan. Of course, he was their grandson. They had the space, the same house I'd grown up in, the bedroom that had been mine and then my brother Daniel's and then mine again. Ethan could have the room with the window that faced the water. My mother would drive him to school. My father would teach him about the boats. It would be temporary, they said. A year, maybe 2. I told Ethan the night before I left. I sat on the edge of his bed and I explained it the best way I knew how, that I had to go work far away on the water to make sure we had enough money for everything he needed. That he'd stay with Grandma and Grandpa. That I would call as often as I could, and I would come home, and this was not forever. He was 6. He understood the parts he was able to understand. Will you miss me? He asked. Every single day, I said. He thought about this. Okay, he said. He fell asleep with his hand tucked under his chin, the way he always slept, and I sat there for about 20 minutes just watching him breathe. Then I went and packed my bag. The work was what it was. I won't romanticize it. Offshore maintenance is not an adventure. It's long shifts and equipment that breaks in inconvenient ways and a bunk in a shared cabin and food that ranges from adequate to barely adequate and a horizon that looks exactly the same in every direction. The men I worked with were mostly quiet, mostly experienced. The kind of people who had learned to carry their private lives internally because there wasn't room for them out there. I carried Ethan. I carried him in the photograph I'd taped above my bunk, the one from the summer before Sarah died, all three of us at the beach, Ethan in a red swimsuit squinting into the sun. I carried him in the specific weight of missing him, which was different from missing Sarah. Missing Sarah was like a wound. Missing Ethan was like a compass needle that never stopped pointing the same direction. Home him get back. I started recording videos in the 3rd month. It started because I'd missed a call. The time zones were complicated and my shift had run long, and by the time I got to a connection point, my mother said Ethan was already asleep. I sat in the common room with my phone and I thought about what I would have said if he'd been awake. So I said it anyway, into the camera, quietly so I didn't wake the men sleeping nearby. "Hey buddy, I know you're asleep. I missed our call tonight and I'm sorry. I wanted you to know I was thinking about you today. There was a sunset out here, you would have liked it. Lots of orange. You know how you like orange, okay? I love you, sleep good." 43 seconds. I sent it to my mother's email with a note asking her to show it to him in the morning. She wrote back he loved it. He made me play it 3 times. So I kept going. Every week, sometimes twice a week when the connection was good. I recorded videos the way other men on the ship wrote letters or called home. It was just the shape my love took out there with limited bandwidth and a time difference that made real conversations difficult. I talked to him about whatever I was thinking, the work when it wasn't dangerous sounding, the water, the stars, which are different out there, brighter, more of them. I talked to him about his mother sometimes, carefully, gently, the way you talk about someone to a child who is still learning the shape of their absence. For his 7th birthday, I recorded a full 10-minute video. I'd gotten a small cake from the ship's galley. One of the cooks had a daughter the same age and was sympathetic. And I put a candle in it, and I sang happy birthday to my son through a phone camera in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And I blew out the candle for him and I told him I was going to take him somewhere good when I got home, wherever he wanted. I thought he was watching them, everyone. I thought he was growing up knowing his father was out there on the water, working, thinking about him, sending him videos of sunsets and birthday cakes and bad jokes, and everything I couldn't figure out how to compress into a phone call. I thought he knew. That assumption, that simple, reasonable, devastating assumption, was the foundation everything else was built on. And it was wrong. I came home after the 3rd contract rotation. 6 years, 3 contracts, 2 months between each one. I'd been back twice in that time, brief visits. Ethan had seemed okay, quieter than I expected, but I'd told myself that was normal, kids change, I'd missed so much of the changing. My mother had assured me he was fine, adjusting, happy at school. The visits had been short enough that I'd filed the distance under. "We'll fix this when I'm home for good." I was home for good now. I drove from the airport to my parents' house on a Tuesday afternoon in October, the same month Sarah had died 6 years before, which I'd noticed but tried not to assign meaning to. The yard looked the same. The oak tree was bigger. There were Halloween decorations on the porch that my mother put out every year without fail. The same plastic pumpkins from when I was a child, faded now, cheerful in a worn way. Ethan was sitting on the porch steps. He stood up when the car pulled in. For 1 second I believed, that he was going to run. He didn't run. He stood very still and he watched me get out of the car and he looked at me with an expression I had no framework for. Because in all the versions of this moment I had imagined, this expression was not among them. It wasn't anger. It wasn't excitement. It was the careful, measured look of a child who has been told something about you and is now trying to reconcile the information with what they're seeing. I walked toward him. He took 1 step backward. I stopped. We looked at each other. He was 12 years old. He had Sarah's eyes and my jaw, and he was taller than I'd expected, and somewhere in the 6 years, I'd been sending him videos of sunsets. He'd become someone I didn't fully recognize. "Ethan," I said. He looked past me at my mother, who had come out onto the porch. Something passed between them, a look, the kind that has a whole conversation in it. Then Ethan looked back at me. "Grandma said you were in prison," he said. His voice was flat, not accusing, just stating a fact. The fact of his childhood delivered plainly, the way children deliver things they've been told so many times they've stopped questioning them. She said that's why you couldn't come home. I stood in my parents' front yard. The October light was going flat and cold across the grass. And I couldn't speak. Not for a long moment. Not because I didn't have words, but because the words I had were insufficient for what I was standing inside. Prison. My son thought I had been in prison. I turned and looked at my mother. She was looking at the porch railing, not at me. I turned back to Ethan. That's not true, I said. He looked at me steadily. That's what she said. I know, I said, it's not true. He was quiet for a moment. Okay, he said. And he went inside. The screen door banged shut behind him. The same sound it had made my entire childhood. And I stood there in the yard while the word okay rang in my ears with all the weight a 12-year-old can put into a word that means nothing and everything at the same time. I hadn't been in prison. I had been on the water, sending him videos every week for 6 years. And somewhere between the sending and the receiving, something had gone very wrong. My mother made tea. That was the first thing she did after Ethan went inside. She went to the kitchen and she put the kettle on. And I stood in the doorway and watched her move around the kitchen. She'd moved around for 50 years, and I tried to find the version of this conversation that didn't end with something breaking permanently. I couldn't find it. I sat down at the table. She put a mug in front of me and sat across from me and folded her hands and looked at them. How long, I said. She didn't ask what I meant. The first year, she said. After you left. He kept asking when you were coming home and we kept saying soon, and then he started asking why you couldn't call more, and she stopped. He was so little, Michael. He was 6 years old and he cried for you every night for the first 3 months and I couldn't. So you told him I was in prison. She flinched. Not right away, she said. It started smaller than that. We said you were in trouble, that you couldn't call, that it wasn't safe. And then, she was quiet. He heard something at school, she said. Another child said something about a father who was in prison, and Ethan came home and asked if that was what happened to you, and she looked at her hands. I didn't correct him. I sat with that. You didn't correct him, I said. He stopped crying that night, she said. He finally had an explanation, something that made sense to a 7-year-old, and he stopped crying, Michael. You don't know what the nights were like. You weren't here. I know I wasn't here, I said. That's not the same as being in prison. My father appeared in the doorway from the hallway. He'd been there a while, I thought. He had the look of a man who'd known this conversation was coming and had positioned himself to be present without being in it. The videos, I said. My mother looked up. I sent videos every week for 6 years, I said. I sent them to your email. You told me he watched them. You said he made you play the birthday one 3 times. Silence. Where are the videos, Mom? She looked at my father. He came and sat down at the table. He was 71 years old, my father. He'd fished these waters for 40 years. His hands were the hands of someone who'd spent a lifetime in cold water and heavy rope. And they were folded on the table now like he didn't know what else to do with them. We watched them, he said. Your mother and I, we watched everyone. And Ethan. A pause. We didn't think it would help, he said. Seeing your face every week. Hearing your voice, we thought it would make the missing worse. You thought, I said. We thought. I looked at these 2 people, my parents, 71 and 68, who had raised me and buried their grief with the same quiet stubbornness they brought to everything, and I tried to locate the anger I knew was in me somewhere. I could feel it, but it was underneath something else, something that felt heavier than anger. He thinks I'm a criminal, I said. He stepped away from me in the yard like I was something dangerous. My son, he's 12 years old and he stepped backward when I came home. My mother's eyes were wet. We were trying to protect him, she said. From what? She looked at me for a long moment. From losing you, she said. Like we almost did, like we. She stopped. My father put his hand over hers. And I understood, suddenly, the shape of something I hadn't fully seen before. Daniel. My brother Daniel had died at sea when I was 19 and he was 22. A storm, a poorly secured line, the kind of accident that happens when conditions are bad enough and luck runs out. He'd been working on a fishing vessel 3 months into what was supposed to be a year contract. My parents had gotten a phone call on a Wednesday morning. I had watched my parents bury a son. And then, 17 years later, I had stood in their kitchen and told them I was taking the same kind of job. I hadn't fully understood until this moment what that had cost them. "You were terrified," I said. Neither of them spoke. "You were terrified something would happen to me out there," I said. "And if something happened to me and Ethan was already attached, already watching my videos, already counting down to when I'd come home, he would have lost you twice," my mother said. "The way we lost Daniel, and then lost you in a different way when. So you decided to lose me for him," I said, "before it could happen by accident." The kitchen was very quiet. The kettle had long since boiled and gone cold again. I understood it. That was the terrible thing. I sat at that table and I understood exactly the mechanism of what they had done, the fear that had powered it, the grief underneath the fear that had been sitting there since Daniel for 30 years. I understood it completely. And Ethan was upstairs in a bedroom that used to be mine, believing his father was a criminal who hadn't loved him enough to come home. Understanding is not the same as forgiveness. And forgiveness was not something I was capable of that afternoon. I slept in my old room that night. Or I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark and I listened to the house settle, and I thought about 6 years of videos going into a folder somewhere, my mother's email. Some subfolder labeled with my name, accumulating unwatched while Ethan grew up one floor above them. Hundreds of recordings, every birthday, every school year. Every time I'd looked at the water and thought of something I wanted to tell him. In the morning, I found Ethan at the kitchen table eating cereal. He looked up when I came in. "Hey," I said. "Hey," he said. I poured coffee and sat across from him. He didn't leave, which I chose to take as something. We sat in silence for a moment. "I want to explain some things," I said. "When you're ready." He looked at his cereal. "Grandma said you'd say that," he said. "What did she say I'd say?" He was quiet for a moment, poking at his bowl. "That you'd have explanations, that people who do things always have explanations." I breathed carefully. "That's true," I said. "People who do things do have explanations. Sometimes the explanations are real." I wrapped my hands around the coffee mug. "I was on a ship, Ethan. I worked offshore. I was gone a long time and I wasn't there, and I should have found a way to be there more, but I was never in prison." He looked up at me. His eyes, Sarah's eyes, were doing something careful. "Then why didn't you call?" he said. "I did," I said. "Every week I sent videos." He frowned. "Grandma showed me some videos from when I was little. You were on a ship." "I sent more than those," I said. "A lot more." He looked at me for a long moment. I could see him trying to reconcile two things: the story he'd been given and the man sitting across from him who didn't look like the version of a father he'd been prepared for. "How many more?" he said. "Hundreds," I said. He put his spoon down. "Where are they?" he said. That question hung in the house for 3 days. I asked my parents about the emails, how many there were, where they'd been stored, what they'd done with them. My mother said she'd saved them, she thought, to an old laptop. The laptop had been retired. She thought the files were on a hard drive somewhere in the study, in the boxes that hadn't been touched since my father had cleared the old computer out 2 winters ago. The study was a room at the back of the house that had always functioned as a kind of archive, years of fishing records, boat maintenance logs, tax documents from the 90s, the accumulated paper residue of a long life in one place. The boxes were in the closet. There were 11 of them. On the 3rd day, Ethan found me in there. I was on the floor surrounded by folders, looking for an external hard drive my mother had described as small and black, which was an insufficient description. Ethan stood in the doorway and looked at the boxes. "What are you doing?" he said. "Looking for the hard drive, the old videos." He was quiet for a moment. Then he came and sat down on the floor across from me. He didn't offer to help. He just sat there, watching me go through the boxes, the way kids sit near things they're not sure about, close enough to see, far enough to retreat. We worked like that in silence for about 20 minutes. He found it, small and black at the bottom of the 3rd box, inside a Ziploc bag with 2 charging cables that didn't match it, and a flash drive labeled Taxes 2019. He held it up. I looked at it. "Is this it?" he said. "I think so," I said. He turned it over in his hands. "Can we look at it?" he said. I found an adapter in a kitchen drawer and we sat at the dining room table, just the 2 of us, my parents somewhere in the back of the house, maintaining a careful distance that I recognized as guilt. The hard drive connected. The folder structure came up on the laptop screen. There was a folder labeled Michael. Inside it, 312 video files. Ethan stared at the number. 312, he said. 6 years, I said. Every week, sometimes more. He scrolled through the file names. They were dated, the year, the month, the day. The first one was from the month I left. The most recent was from 8 weeks ago, my last week on the ship. He stopped scrolling. He looked at the screen. Then he looked at me. Can I watch them alone? He said. It was the question I'd been afraid of and hoping for simultaneously. I wanted to be there, wanted to explain context, wanted to preemptively soften the ones where I was exhausted or sad or speaking too directly about things a 12-year-old might not be ready for. But he was 12 and he was asking. Yes, I said. I took the laptop to his room and set it up at his desk, showed him how to navigate the files and left him there. I went and sat on the porch. The ocean was about a quarter-mile away, invisible from the house but audible on quiet days, a low presence, something felt more than heard. I'd grown up with that sound. I'd spent 6 years surrounded by the real thing. I sat on the porch and I listened to it and I waited. My mother came out after an hour. She sat in the other chair, the one that had always been hers, and neither of us said anything for a while. He's watching them, I said eventually. I know. All 312 of them. She folded her hands in her lap. I watched them too, she said quietly. Every single one. I used to watch them after Ethan was asleep. She paused. I know that's not. Mom. She stopped. I understand why you were scared, I said. I understand about Daniel. I know what it cost you when he died. I know what it cost you when I took this job. I looked at the yard. But you took something from him that he can't get back. You took something from me that I can't get back. And understanding why doesn't fix it. She nodded, a small compressed nod. I know, she said. He's going to need time, I said. With me, just with me. And I need you to let that happen without filling the space. Without explaining. Without getting between us the way you've been getting between us for 6 years. She was crying quietly, not dramatically. Just crying the way people cry when the thing they were most afraid of has arrived, and is smaller and larger than they imagined at the same time. Okay, she said. We sat there until the light changed. Ethan watched the videos for 4 hours. I knew because I tracked the time without meaning to, marking each hour against what he might be seeing, the early ones, where I was new to this and spoke too formally. The ones from the second year where I'd gotten comfortable and rambled more. The birthday videos, 1 per year, all 7 of them. Candles and bad singing and me talking to a camera in a ship's common room or a bunk, or a storage room where I'd found a few minutes of privacy. He came out at 6 in the evening. I was still on the porch. He came and stood in the doorway and looked at me. His eyes were red. He'd been crying or was fighting not to, I couldn't tell which, and I recognized the expression as one he'd gotten from me, that compressed, careful look that means something large is happening internally and you're deciding whether to let it out. You sang happy birthday, he said. Every year, I said. You have a terrible voice, he said. I know. He was quiet for a moment. The one from my 8th birthday, he said. You talked about Mom. Yeah, I said. You said she used to sing it better. She did, significantly better. He leaned against the doorframe. I don't really remember her singing, he said. I know, I said. You were young, but I remember. She did this thing where she'd harmonize with herself on the dear part, just slightly. You could barely hear it, but it was there. He was quiet. In the video from when I was 9, he said, you said you were saving up for a trip, that when you came home we'd go wherever I wanted. I still have the money, I said. He looked at me. Really? Really, I said. I've been adding to it for 6 years, wherever you want, you name it. He looked out at the yard for a moment, processing something. I watched him do it. Watched the 12-year-old version of my son work through the math of 6 years of his life, rearranging itself around new information. It wasn't something I could help with. It was his to do. They lied to me for a really long time, he said finally. Yes, I said. They did. They thought they were protecting me. Yes, were they? I thought about this seriously, because he deserved a serious answer. I think they were protecting themselves, I said. And they convinced themselves it was the same thing. I paused. I think they loved you and they were scared and they made a very bad decision and then they were too deep into it to know how to get out. He absorbed this. Are you angry at them? He said. Yes, I said. I'm going to be angry for a while. "But you're not leaving," he said. The question landed quietly between us. "No," I said, "I'm not leaving." He looked at me for a long moment with those eyes I'd been missing for 6 years, those eyes that were his mother's eyes in his father's face, and I watched something shift in them. Subtle. The way things shift when a person is reorganizing their understanding of who they are and where they come from. "In the last video," he said, "the one from 8 weeks ago," he paused, "you said you were finally coming home." "I did," I said. "You said," he stopped, cleared his throat. "You said you hoped I was okay, that you thought about me every day, that you were sorry it took so long." He looked down at his feet. "You said you didn't know what I'd been told about you, but that whatever it was you wanted me to know the truth was that you never stopped." I couldn't speak for a moment. "Yeah," I said, "that's what I said." He looked up. "Why did you say that?" he said. "The part about not knowing what I'd been told, why did you say that?" I was quiet for a second. "Because I'd been feeling for a while that something was wrong," I said. "The calls that were always quick, the way you seemed distant when we did talk, the way my parents always seemed to be in a hurry to get off the phone." I looked at him. I didn't know what it was, but I knew something was off. He nodded slowly. "So you knew," he said. "Not exactly, but somewhere." He stood there in the doorway for a moment longer. The evening light was coming through at a low angle and it caught the side of his face and he looked. He looked like his mother and like me and like himself, which was someone I was only beginning to meet. He stepped out onto the porch. He sat down in the chair between mine and my mother's. Not my mother's chair, the one between. He pulled his knees up and wrapped his arms around them and looked out at the yard the way he'd probably been looking out at this yard for years. From this porch, wondering about the version of his father he'd been given. "I have questions," he said. "I know," I said. "I have time. A lot of questions. I'm not going anywhere." He was quiet for a moment. Then, very carefully, "The way you say something for the first time that you've needed to say for a long time without knowing it." "Okay," he said. "Okay, Dad. We didn't fix everything that night. I want to be honest about that. Because the version of this story where we fixed everything that night would be the kind of story that feels good and isn't real. What actually happened was that we sat on that porch until dark and he asked questions and I answered them. And some of the answers were hard, and some of them were just sad, and a few of them made him laugh in that surprised way you laugh when something is both funny and painful. He asked what the ship looked like. He asked what I ate out there. He asked about the sunsets I described in the videos. Were they really that good, or was I exaggerating for his benefit? "Both," I said. "They were really that good. I was also exaggerating." He asked about his mother, not about her death, about her. About what she was like when she was young, about the things she did when she sang happy birthday. I told him everything I could remember. My parents came out eventually, tentatively, and sat on the steps rather than the chairs, giving us the distance they understood now they should have been giving for years. My mother had made dinner, something warm, and we all ate on the porch in a configuration that was strained and careful and not quite a family and not quite not one. After dinner, my father said very quietly to Ethan, "I'm sorry, son." Not to me, to Ethan. Ethan looked at him for a long moment. "I know," he said. "Not forgiveness, not yet, but acknowledgement, which is where forgiveness begins if it's going to begin at all." I'm writing this 6 months later. Ethan lives with me now. We found an apartment 20 minutes from my parents, close enough that he can see them, far enough that he has some distance from the weight of what that house holds. He goes there for Sunday dinners most weeks. It's not easy and it's not simple, and there are evenings when he comes home quiet in a way I recognize as grief working itself through him. I let it. I don't try to fix it or redirect it or protect him from it. I just make sure he knows I'm there. He's watched all 312 videos now. Multiple times, some of them. He showed me once which ones he'd watched more than 3 times, the birthday ones, most of them. The one from when he was 9 where I talked about Sarah. A long rambling one from his 11th birthday where I was clearly exhausted and spoke too directly about being afraid I was running out of time to know him. That one he'd watched 7 times. I asked him why once. He thought about it. "You sounded real," he said. "The other ones you were kind of performing, like you were trying to seem okay. That one you just were what you were." "Scared," I said. "Yeah," he said, "me too. We're figuring it out. That's the most accurate thing I can say. We're learning each other the way people learn each other when they've missed years, carefully, with a lot of questions, leaving room for the parts that don't make sense yet. Last week he asked if we could go to the coast, just to see it. He'd spent his whole life near the water but had somehow never stood at the actual edge of the ocean and looked out toward where I'd been. We drove out on a Saturday morning and parked at a beach access point and walked through the dunes. He stood at the waterline. He looked out at the horizon. "That's where you were," he said. "Somewhere out there," I said. "Different parts, different years." He was quiet for a while. The water came up and went back. The same water it had always been. The same horizon. "Could you see the shore?" he said. "From where you were?" "No," I said, "not from that far out." He nodded. "I used to come here sometimes," he said. "When I was little, Grandpa would bring me, and I'd look out and I'd wonder." He stopped, picked up a piece of broken shell and turned it over. "I used to wonder if you could see me from wherever you were." I looked at him. "I couldn't," I said, "but I thought about you every time I looked at the water." I paused. "Every single time." He threw the shell piece into the water, watched it go. "Yeah," he said. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. He reached over and without looking at me, without making anything of it, put his hand briefly against my arm. 1 second. The way you touch something to confirm it's real. Then he put his hands in his pockets and we stood there together and watched the water go in and out, the way it had been going since before either of us existed and would keep going long after. And for the first time in 6 years, I was exactly where I was supposed to be.